People who help fight human trafficking, what are some tips you have for spotting illegal activity and reporting it? I worked as front desk for a hotel. Had a couple of experiences with this. Look for groups of 2, 3 where one person does all of the talking. Specifically when the other rest look scared, are overly covered, cringe when the talker is speaking, or look under the influence of something. Ensure you get ID from all parties when you suspect something is going on. Note down their room number and names given. Trust your gut. What we call a gut feeling is a combination of millions of tiny factors you might not knowingly be aware of. Tiny details like hitched breathing, micro expressions, specific lying tells, environmental factors, etc. These will add up and let your subconscious mind make connections that your general mind might not. Trust that feeling if you suspect something is wrong, and contact the police to inform them of a suspected human trafficking issue. Both times my gut told me to call it and I ended up regrettably being correct. These specific details are great. Thank you. I've told this story on here before. I don't fight human trafficking, but I am a teacher who had a student who was sold by his mother in exchange for drugs. He was kept as a sex slave from ages 3-11 when the FBI uncovered a sex ring and found him. He had never been to school. He had never even been out of the house. These sorts of crimes are not being committed out in the open. They are very well hidden. You will never see these children, and no one is missing them. This poor boy couldn't read or write. One day, he got a 100 on his spelling test. He asked me if I could call his mom and ask her to take him back, and he'd be a good boy from now on. Child sex trafficking is unfortunately all too common, but it's become a very hidden problem. This is heartbreaking. Here in Spain we get a lot of women from Eastern Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa. Some pay for their trip to Europe this way, some are blackmailed, and some are lured offers of jobs like cleaning or low-level administrative jobs, secretaries, paper pushing, and end up in a roadside brothel. If you're a young woman in a poor area of Eastern Europe and you get an offer for a easy job in Germany, France, Spain or the Netherlands, be very suspicious. I was working in China teaching English. One of my fellow teachers was blonde and good looking. One day she told me excitedly she had an offer to marry a Russian man. He was going to pay her $30,000 to marry him. All she had to do was travel to Russia to meet him. We were in Kikahar, about 2,000 kilometers from Russia. I managed to talk her out of it. I think I may have saved her life. It was definitely a trap. You saved her. In Latin America, look for maids who have been with a family since they were children. In my country they are called criadas. This is form of servitude that closely resembles slavery and begins with a child, usually female, of a poor rural family being brought to live with a moderately wealthy urban family. The promise of a better future than what the parents could provide. These kids do not attend school and perform house chores all day and are paid in food and living quarters and sometimes the promise of money that the bosses are holding for them. They grow up this way, so when they are adults they are afraid to leave. They do not know any other way of life. The bosses do not often acknowledge anything wrong, and they claim that the crier is grateful for having been given a better life. I sadly have to admit that this happened in my extended family. They were bosses to a crier who would be 75 years old today, only after all my aunts died and my cousins inherited the crier. They acknowledged the wrongdoing and arranged for her to have a pension and a house and never have to work again and be treated a respected member of the family. But it was too late. She only lived as a retired person for 5 years before dying. She never learned to read. She never had children or a husband or any type or significant other. In Texas, something similar happened to my great-grandmother when she was around 10. This can happen anywhere, and children are particularly vulnerable. Her father traded her for some farm animals in the 1910s. So she went to live with this middle-aged married couple. She was supposed to be their servant in exchange for food and board. She had her first child fathered by the husband when she was 11. It didn't survive. The second one did. After my grandma told me about all this and more, I suddenly understood my great-grandmother better, her personality and her actions. And I had always wondered why she wasn't much older than her oldest children. And then I knew why. If I remember correctly, she died in the late 90s, early 2000s. She was a complicated woman. Edit I am not sure if this will make anyone feel any better, but stick with me. From what I understand, she ended up getting married to a man when she was around 18 or 20 or so to escape that situation. He was also very old and abusive. She went through a series of super old and abusive men. And I am not pointing fingers, and neither is my grandma. But they all died from stuff like heart attacks early on. Maybe because they were old. It is a bit of a weird coincidence. Keep in mind, my great grandmother was hardworking, but she was never allowed to go to school or do anything to invest in her own future. She was stuck in below minimum wage jobs with a whole lot of kids to feed and clothe. I can't say her life was ever easy or fair. She was a hard woman and hard to like. And I personally always thought that she seemed unhappy. I don't blame her on that score. But we loved her. She lived to be in her 90s in an assisted living facility. And at the very least, she had children and grandchildren who loved her. That is so ducked. And yet, not even very uncommon. Treating human beings like commodities, robots, or livestock only has consequences for the victims. The scum who are actually doing the bad thing just get away with it. And have gotten away with it for thousands of years. I saw an old video of a mother attempting to sell her son for money for food and wanted to give her son a chance of survival. It was sad all around. It was recorded in Thailand. It didn't say anything about her situation or how she ended up there. I'm an intern at a human trafficking task force. It really helps just knowing the basics, because I had no idea everything it entails. There is sex trafficking, the one we all know the most about, labor trafficking, and organ trafficking. Trafficking happens through force, fraud, and or coercion. Trafficking is something of value that is being exchanged. The something of value can be food, shelter, clothes, money. You get the gist. There is also the age issue. Anyone under the age of 18 that has sex in exchange for a good is automatically considered a human trafficking victim, even if the legal age of consent is 16. A 16-year-old cannot consent to commercial sex. It also does not matter if they say they're 18 and have fake identification proving they're 18. If you are caught paying someone that is legally 16 for sex, you are human trafficking. My organization is holding a webinar on this soon. And we also have social media where we explain the issues. If you guys want to PM me, I'll share our socials. Visualization helps us fight height, and so do donations if you can. We are a non-profit. Thank you for reading. My wife used to teach piano in an affluent suburb, and one of her students had an elderly nana who was openly treated like dirt by everyone in the house. She began to suspect this was a case of trafficking slavery, but shortly after she took a moment to talk to the old lady about her situation. The family got rid of the old lady and subsequently fired my wife from teaching their kid. Edit answering questions. This was in Monmouth County, New Jersey around the year 2000. I believe the family was from India. The child said Nana was not her grandmother. The family got rid of the old lady. Did they just throw her into the wood chipper or what? Well, hey-ho officer. We've had a doozy of a day. Edit thanks for the gold, kind stranger. Might I interest you in the college kid suicide pact? Edit 20 silver 2. Might make some improvements to the new house with that. Edit 3 duck I gotta get a rickety cabin now. Stop awarding me. I can't afford this shit. Might have to rescue a college kid. Edit 4 you guys are doing this out of spite. A hugs and wholesome are gonna seriously make me go to my college campus and say I got your friend. Edit 5 I hate you. Edit 6 I am livid, I've gotten platinum and I am gonna wait today I learned people are back on campus to yell at them. You have got to be more careful. I actually have a story for this. I'm by no means someone who exposes sex trafficking for a living. Just someone who had an experience. I lived in a very sketch apartment complex in Phoenix. My wife and I generally keep to ourselves, so we didn't really have a problem. We at first noticed that there were constant visitors to our immediate neighbors. Their front door faced our front door. We figured maybe they were selling weed or some shit like that. Do you? We don't give a flying duck as long as you don't bring trouble to us. Then we noticed it was only men who would show up every 15-20 minutes, stay for 15, 45 minutes and leave. At this point we rethinking whatever. If a chick wants to use sex work, we can't give a shit. Then we noticed the pimp and the other girls in this apartment. They looked young, never left the apartment unless escorted, and would only stick around for a couple of months before a new girl was brought in. When I say young, I mean they looked maybe 18. We only started realizing during quarantine and were home all day. The men would constantly knock on our door throughout the day and night, which is what caught our attention. Anyways, we called Phoenix PD. They knocked on the door and said they couldn't do anything without us providing photographic evidence. So we sat on our patio one day and discreetly starting taking photos of all the men coming in. Call the cops again and provide evidence. They knock on the door again. A customer walks out and hauls butt. The girls all haul butt. The pimp comes by after and bangs on our door. We stayed at my dad's house for 2 weeks while a sex crimes investigator surveyed the apartment. The pimp helped them move out and the investigator was able to find their new spot. We moved the duck out very shortly after because we were afraid of some sort of revenge. This is long, but pay attention to the people surrounding where you live. No need to be an Aussie person. But when we actually started paying attention, we saw what was going on more clearly. We were concerned because none of these girls spoke any English, weren't allowed out of the complex without an escort, and seemed to be replaced constantly. You are awesome and thank you for going the extra mile. I hope they were able to help those girls out. I hope so too. Once they found out the new spot, we didn't get any updates from the detective. I'd like to assume that they were able to bust the ring. Our country, Philippines, is unfortunately the global hotspot of child cyber sex trafficking in the world. Unlike what is usually portrayed in movies, these children are not kidnapped by syndicates then sold to pedophiles. Sadly, most of the sexual abuses happen at home. Parents or guardians are the ones exploiting them to get money. I'm not directly involved in the actual rescue or fight, but I do work with non-profit organizations that provide shelter and therapy for rescued victims. I have met and talked to some of these children. Many of them did not even realize that they are being abused, especially those who were not raped in real life. They were groomed to think that just getting nude in front of the camera or touching themselves for pedophiles is not bad. I think one important thing is that kids should know when they are being abused. It should be taught in schools. It can save lives. I am in the US. I am friends with a woman that, when she was a child, her mother would charge men to come and rape her. They were always introduced to her as Uncle so and so. Her mother was heavily into drugs and used the money to continue the habit. She's doing okay. Her mother is still in prison and they no contact obviously. She finally ran away and got in touch with authorities when she was 16. My friend has horrible panic attacks just around men in general, and especially when the word uncle is used. She is nearly 40 and single by choice, and is very reserved and introverted, on anti-anxiety and anti-depression meds, and sees 2 therapists regularly. She is so creative and imaginative. It just breaks my heart that she is hurt even to this day by what was done to her. How does anyone ever recover from that? Unfortunately, the answer a lot of the time is they do not. One thing to note is sometimes it can happen in your own backyard. It can be the people you least expect. I remember as a kid, maybe age 10 or 11, I used to play at one of my neighbor's house down the street. The girl who lived there was 2 years younger than me, so around 7 or 8, and I knew that her family was poorer than ours cause the house was smaller and sorta in shambles and very dirty. I played there all the time, and she would always say things that were odd or sexual, and it would always make me uncomfortable. My gut told me something was wrong. One day she casually dropped that her brother had molested her and that his friends paid to use her body as well. I remember not being able to really process the weight of what she told me, but I knew it was wrong, and I ended up telling my mum, and my mum called CPS on the family. Not sure what ended up happening to her because my family moved neighborhoods, but it still really creeps me out to this day, knowing I had sleepovers at her house when her brother and his friends were over, and I could have just as easily been taken advantage of. This type of thing is not uncommon at all. Wow, that's really awful. Even more awful how common it is. Yeah, it is sad, but the more aware we become, the more people can try to put a stop to it or make a change for the better. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe for more videos.